core values to valued culture. Here is your host, Will Scott, interviewing another CEO about leading culture in their company.
Well, I want to welcome Will Scott to our podcast today. Will's passionate about creating environments where people thrive so that they can be the best they can be. A self-proclaimed culture czar, Will has studied, researched, and adopted corporate culture strategies in several of his own companies, as well as helped multiple other businesses with their implementations. Each one has its own remarkable story. Will leads workshops and speaks regularly on the subject of corporate culture using his proprietary 9-step process for taking organizations from simply having core values to truly having a valued culture. Author of The Culture Fix, Solving C-Suite Problems at the Ground Level with 9 Deeds in 90 Days, and host of the Valued Culture podcast, Will has set out to create 2020 Culture Czars by 2020. A longtime member of the Entrepreneurs Organization, Will served on the board of the EO Chicago for 5 years and is a facilitator of the EO Accelerator and 10,000 Small Businesses programs. With an MBA in International Business from the University of Southern California, Will has been an entrepreneur for more than 20 years and is an implementer of the Entrepreneurial Operating System, or as it's better known, EOS. Born in Zambia, Will is a European and naturalized U.S. citizen who has lived in 6 countries and done business in more than 50. He has served in Her Majesty's Royal Marines and led transformations in organizations as diverse as student unions, churches, and global charitable foundations. Will is the proud father of Sam and Chloe, an avid fan of National Geographic, practices yoga daily, and completes several triathlons each year. Will, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it, Adam. Good to be here.
We're so glad to have you. And I'm reading over this bio and wondering when you have time for all those things. So
I'm glad we had time to read it. It's a little extensive, but I appreciate the introduction. Thank you very much.
No, absolutely. And I know we're going to talk a lot about culture. We're going to talk about a valued culture. There's so much that you're doing, but I'm really interested in your work. And as I shared with you, you come at this topic very differently from a lot of other people who are primarily consultants, or maybe they were an author. You're an author, but you ran companies. On top of that, you've lived in multiple countries, and you've taken a different path to get here. So I'd love just to hear, and I think a lot of our audience would love to hear some of your story.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll start with at the end of the story, if you like, with answering the question: how did I get into the business of being a culture consultant? Because you're right. I basically was running my own company. I started my first company in 1999. That's a supply chain software company that's in its 20th year this year. We're partnered with NetSuite, and so somewhere around the world we are installing a new implementation of our software, every couple of weeks now. It's a pretty exciting business. And I also got into mobile app development in 2010 and exited that in 2016. And friends really, and other, colleagues who are leading their own businesses sort of saw the mojo, if you like, or the culture vibe that I had going on, and started saying, hey, well, can you come and look at things in my company? Check out my culture. I've got some concerns. So I started doing that, and I've done that now many times. And so it was time to write the book and time to sort of formalize the company around what I've called Culture Czars. And I'm a big believer in each company there is a culture czar around who you can build a culture, who represents the core values of the company. And it's not always the CEO or the founder, although it often can be. So that's kind of how I got into this. And unless you want to kind of check anything.
I am going to ask more about some even further back, but I'm interested in this. You mentioned you guys had some mojo going on. Now, I don't know. I mean, did that start with your first company? And I mean, it's hard to believe that it was there from the very beginning. Is it something that evolved? What was that?
It was something that I was passionate about from the very beginning. So, like I said, I started my first company in 1999, but I wrote my first set of core values for that company in 2020. And the idea was building the company around a set of values that everybody could buy into. Wherever they lived and wherever they came from, wherever their background was, we had a common set of values. And I often liken it to the U.S. Constitution. Imagine trying to coexist in this country without a set of values. You know, how would we coexist? How would we live together? So the Constitution sort of set up what we mean by values, right? And they're kind of hard to measure, but we know what they mean. And so likewise, I believe that's important in a company. And so today, that's one of the starting places I often help people with is the core values for their company, which define how folks should work together. And my real work is about actually taking that to really having a valued culture, which is why my podcast and my book and everything is called From Core Values to Valued Culture. I believe a lot of people get the core values, stick the poster on the wall, and then do nothing with it. And then before long, people are cynical because they're not really living it. So I'll talk more about that later. But perhaps to answer your question about why do I feel now like I'm doing something that I was born to do? And why did I write my first set of core values, in 2000 for that first company? And then not just write them, but then live by them and make sure they were alive and thriving every week and every day so that people knew how we worked together at Ware Systems. And it goes back to my childhood in Zambia, growing up. One of the things I loved to do was to build clubhouses. I built houses in trees. I built forts on stilts. I built underground caves. I built bamboo homes underneath mango trees. And I just loved creating those environments, you see. And I've changed that now to create environments where people thrive. Why? So they can be the best that they can be. So I'd be in these clubhouses and I'd want to share, my treehouse. Don't want to sit there on my own. I share it with friends. But before they came in, I want to make sure that, they were going to have a pleasant experience and that they were going to follow certain credos that were important to me. So I would pin some rules on the side of the treehouse and make sure that folks knew how, welcome, but this is how we behave when we're here. And there'd be things like, be nice to each other and keep it secret and don't tell adults and no littering, that sort of thing. So here I am, fast forward many decades later, and I'm really doing the same thing. I'm helping people learn to work together so people love where they work and who they're working with.
So, but where did even that, from a very early age, this idea that I need these guiding principles to hold people together, where did that come from? Was there something you'd seen in your family? Was it innate? Was it something you read?
I think that's a great question. I think it's because I put so much effort into creating this cool place. I wanted to share it, but I didn't want to share it with folks that were going to take away from the pleasurable experience. And I guess I'd have to say it's innate, unless I can think of any other experience that I had. But I would say that was innate. And sometimes I think, was that controlling of me? Or was it just me showing leadership and wanting to make sure everybody had a good time, when they were together there? And you know what else is powerful about it? Is if I saw a couple of my friends, like, getting into a little, squabble, then I could just say, hey, guys, without being an asshole or without kind of being a dictator or whatever, I could just say, hey, guys, and point to the rules on the wall and say, we agreed to be nice. And now it changes everything because you can't argue with it. We all agreed to be nice. So I don't have to come across as their boss or anything like that. It's just whatever our sort of social level is, we can all just agree to a set of timelines, and then anybody can propagate that. Anybody can call on that. And I think that's really, really powerful in a company where you can have people at all levels, but they're all empowered by the values to, call upon the behaviors that we've all agreed to work by.
How much are you driven by creating a community, right? That there's culture, but what I'm hearing from early childhood was create a community.
Yeah, I mean, where do you draw the line between culture and community? And I mean, I think community describes sort of a collection of people, but culture really describes the feelings that you want to have in that community. And I don't think we talk enough about feelings in the workplace. And after all, we're human beings, and we are all feelings, in some ways. That's what we are. And yet we don't talk about it. And I think, again, core values or enable you to, A, talk about feelings, and B, feel good in that environment. We spend so much of our time at work. Why don't we care more about how people feel at work? So, yes, call it a community, call it a culture, but ultimately, for me, it's about how people feel in that environment.
Now, you've talked a lot about this. You've put a lot of thought into it, and I'm interested in hearing a little more about your experience with the Royal Marines. You were driven to start a company in '99. How much of that was you saw a problem that needed to be solved? How much of it was you just wanted to be captain of your own destiny, and how much of it was you wanted to bring life to this idea of culture?
Yeah, well, one thing I had learned earlier in my career, before starting Ware Systems in '99, was how I wanted it to feel working at that company, because I had a couple of bad experiences, working in companies where it didn't feel good, and there wasn't direction, and there wasn't, if you like, a set of values that we cooperated around. So I certainly learned some things there that if and when I started my company, I knew that this was going to be important and at the forefront of everything I did. And, in my own podcast, one of the questions that I ask my guests, who are generally CEOs of fast-growing companies, they consistently will say and agree that the number one thing they work on and the number one thing they need to try and get right is the culture. If you get that right, then the other things will follow, such as revenues and profits and so on. But you need to get culture right first. And that's about the people, right? So you got to have the right people, right seats, but also people that are fitting the culture. And how do you hire for culture? Well, that's something that I talk about extensively in my book, The Culture Fix.
Absolutely. So you talk about the mojo you had going on, and can you give some examples of things your friends were hearing about your companies or things they were seeing? Just very real examples that caused people to say, hey, come help me do that.
So I think there's a couple of things. So, that company I've mentioned a couple of times now that I started in 1999, we still have some of the same employees with us 20 years later.
Holy smokes.
Yeah, and quite a few of them. And why is that? So first of all, it's an amazing privilege to work with people over that kind of span of time. I saw these guys, get their girlfriends or boyfriends. I saw them then get married, have children. Their children go to college. It's very cool. So why? Well, because again, I think it's that feeling, and the behaviors that you'll see in a company where there is a great culture, is things like people working well together. People not being afraid to be vulnerable in front of each other. They can feel safe, and safety is so huge. Daniel Coyle talks about that in his book, The Culture Code.
Yes.
How feeling safe in a team, feeling safe is powerful and empowering, and enables us to be ourselves. And of course, if we're vulnerable with each other, the trust level goes up very high. So I believe those are things that people feel when you walk into an office with a great culture. But then some of the more obvious things are I think people show up earlier, they stay later, they're more loyal, they work with you over, they won't go to the next position down the street for $5,000 more. Yeah. Those are the kinds of things that I think you see in a more tangible way as well.
Can you give some examples? And I think this is where a lot of the meat is when we dig into this sort of thing. But what does it look like, or what are some examples of teammates working together where there's vulnerability? Because I think that's a scary thing for people, and it can either be, hey, that's too scary for us to try, and it's career suicide, and for other people, it just seems like soft, fluffy stuff, like therapist talk. So what does it look like when people are able to be vulnerable with one another?
Yeah, well, for one thing, they're willing to share personal things. And you mentioned the Entrepreneurs Organization, I think, before we actually started recording, Adam. But in EO, we're taught to share, and again, it helps build trust. Share what we call the 5%. The 5% of our lives that we don't tell everybody, and it builds trust. And trust is one of the factors that leads to great teamwork. And you wanting to help your colleagues and help your friends is if they've been willing to be vulnerable and share something personal. So it does mean that we are sharing personal things or things about our lives outside of work in the workplace, which helps our colleagues know us and trust us. And that can be health concerns, or maybe financial things, or something painful that's happening at home, something about their children, something about their parents, all these concerns that you might have. In a lot of environments, that would be seen as weakness to talk about those things. So people don't share those things, and they don't feel the same affinity and loyalty with the place that they're working.
Mm-hmm. So it's really encouraging people just to be people.
Yeah, that's right. And again, to talk about, feelings and personal things. A big one is just asking for help. A lot of companies, the culture is fear-based. And in that situation, people don't feel like they can ask for help. So one sign I look for when I go into a company is are they open? Are they sharing? And also, are they putting their hand up and asking for help?
How do you determine that?
Oh, just by observing in a meeting how fluid the conversation is, and whether people are, how honest they're being, and literally are they saying, that's, hey, listen, I'm going to need some help with this. Like in EOS speak, rocks is a good one. Right. One of the things we touch in our L10 meeting every week is, hey, is this rock on track or off track? And a healthy sign is, you know what, I'm off track, guys. I need help with that.
That's good. That's good. I want to get into the research you've done on culture, but how did your time in the Royal Marines shape your thoughts on culture, maybe differently than your corporate experience?
Yes, well, of course, I was very young. I was in my, it was right, it was during and right after college, so I was in my late teens.
Oh, wow.
But really what I learned a lot about was of course, leadership and how things work in the military, and the importance of breaking, large unit down into small units and small teams that, again, have that trust factor and work well together. And even down to actually, we had, a buddy system where, so the ultimate unit is of course yourself, I guess, but you're paired up with a buddy. And that is so important to getting through those tough training exercises, or when you're sleep deprived, and you've got to turn out for reveille in the next morning at 6 a.m. with a pressed uniform and all that stuff is helping each other out. And for sure, values and credos and things like that were also very important to how people felt. And that's so. I think I did learn a lot about what how to feel good and how to feel secure and how to feel confident, and what sort of environment, what sort of leaders, what sort of values helped engender those feelings and enabled you to do things that you didn't know you could do.
Oh, so you mentioned having some negative experiences, not feeling the way you wanted to feel in the corporate world. Do you ever look back to that time in the military and say, there's a better way to do this? I mean, was it the juxtaposition of those two experiences?
I think military systems work the way they do for the right reasons. I know that we felt like we would do anything for each other.
Wow.
Yeah. and of course that's what you want in a situation. I mean, I'm not an expert on it today, Adam, but Warcraft has changed, hasn't it, enormously. So I think that the technology and things have changed a lot of it, but I still think ultimately when it comes down to it, if you've got men and women in that situation of high risk, still the same values pertain. I'm going to look out for that person before I even look after myself, because that's what they would do for me. And I know that that's actually going to be ultimately better for all of us if we all have that attitude.
That's great. So you've done a lot of research. What's one of the most unorthodox or unusual sources of inspiration for you as it pertains to culture? Maybe something that's completely off the beaten path. It's not a Patrick Lencioni book. It's not anything from Peter Drucker. What's the most out there thing?
I'm not sure this is exactly answering your question, but I know one of the big things that I think is different about the Cultures Ours program and what I encourage companies to do culturally is to use the arts and to go very graphical and very visual. And so at the end of my program and at the end of the 9 deeds in my book, it's ultimately about bringing everything together and answering the big questions of the who, what, when, why, where, how, in a graphical representation. Because most of us, our chances of remembering and understanding something is far greater if it's depicted graphically than if it's simply words. It's more memorable, it's more understandable, and we're more likely to buy into it and feel it and know where we fit in that big picture of things. So that's a lot about for me is when I say bringing the culture alive. That's what I'm talking about. Using characters or pictures or legends, movie heroes, whatever it is, to bring values alive. Even music, I think, can be really helpful in terms of helping bring the culture alive. Ultimately, it's defined by words of core values, and they're really important. And I spend a lot of time trying to get those really unique and personal to the company and the people in the company. And hopefully, they end up with core values that nobody else in the world has got. So it's not just integrity and respect anymore. It's different. It's much more about something that's more meaningful. So that's something that's different about when you walk into one of my clients. You're going to see that the core values are brought alive and thriving, and of course carried through to important things like how do we unhire and how do we hire people that are either not fitting or fitting the culture.
You got me thinking about the musical piece, and I was thinking it'd be great if every time somebody walks in the office, they have an entrance song. Boxers or wrestling.
Yeah, wouldn't that make those people feel great, right? How would that make them feel if that happened when they walked in? And that's why I encourage people to start their town hall. If you're doing a town hall for your corporation, every week or every couple of weeks, and hopefully it's more than once a month. I know a lot of people do it monthly, but I think there's a lot of value in doing it more frequently than that. But it's starting that, and like almost the sounding bell for, hey, we're starting our town hall, is you start playing, the company theme song. One of my great clients is Sabre, and they are the largest manufacturer in the world of pepper spray. And they begin their town halls with the Rolling Stones' Start Me Up, because one of the lines in there, if you're familiar with the lyrics of that song, is, making grown men cry. And the Sabre tagline for years has been making grown men cry since 1975. So yeah, Start Me Up it's also a great song, of course, but imagine how that makes people feel as they're stepping into their town hall meeting. And at that town hall meeting, by the way, one of the things that David, the CEO, and his 3 siblings, who it's a family-owned business, of course, one of the things they talk about at that town hall is they lift up people who were caught committing core values that month. And so, and they actually give out awards and things too. But and it all comes together because you do need these programs to make sure that you're bringing people back to and telling the stories that are valuable representations of the culture. And that's your opportunity to do it.
I watched one of your YouTube videos on Sabre and their values. And anyone who's listening, I would encourage them to do it. And the reason why, and I'm not going to do it justice here, it's not the values, but what really astounded me is that you frame it up so it's not just words on a wall, because people see things like teamwork and, as you said, respect, integrity, customer service, but you actually frame it and pull it together so that it's a guide that tells everybody in the company, not just here's how you need to think about your day-to-day decisions. It's here's where you fit in the big picture. Here's what you do. Here's where you're connected to others. Here are the feelings we want. And then you even touched on their we'll call it a BHAG, their whom they give back to when you go in. So I'd love for you to just speak a little bit at a high level about how somebody can think more broadly about values, almost as a strategic framework or North Star.
Yeah, right. I like the way you phrase that. So, I think you were starting to talk about, their BHAG, which is also, their why. And they decide, they kind of discerned that, their pepper spray, their product is typically, it's not an offensive thing, it's a defensive thing. And it's, it's used by police forces all over the world, as well as, a lot of girls on college campuses and everything in between. And so ultimately, it is protecting and saving lives. So one of the cool things is that they came up with is when they did the numbers, and again, the process for this is laid out in my book, but for how do you determine the why, which is so important. And their why is they're going to protect and save 70 million lives by 2021.
That'll get you up in the morning.
Right.
You're not just going to fill a can with pepper spray.
It's funny you should say that, because in fact, even one of the siblings, the sister Megan, she is more jazzed about going to work in her own company, in which she is an owner, once we figured out that what their why is, that they're not just shipping aerosol cans, as you say, they are saving lives, and a lot of them. And, it's so important, Adam. I like to say that, my work is about helping people love where they work and who they work with, but also why they work. So if I can walk into a company at the beginning of the day, enjoying and looking forward to where I'm working, who I'm working with, that's going to just put me in a great place of productivity and for the day. But then if I can leave at the end of the day knowing that I did something meaningful for the world, then I also am going to feel great about that. And, that's why it's really important that CEOs do figure out the why for their company and are able to articulate that for their employees. It's especially important with millennials who don't just work for a paycheck. They want to feel like they're doing something worthwhile for the world. And every company is. It's just a question of getting the right words to describe that. And often it's about the customer's customer. It's 2 stages downstream from wherever your service or product is.
That's great. What do you see as what causes the discrepancy between companies having these stated values that are on the walls and the behavior of employees or the ways people work together that are completely contrary to those values?
Yeah, I love that question, and that's where a lot of the work is, because as I've said, a lot of people have the poster on the wall, but even the leadership is not, complying, or if you like, in concert with those values. And if they're not, certainly, the associates aren't either, and are probably cynical about them. And that's almost as bad as not having any values at all, because it's kind of a double standard or something. So amongst these 9 deeds that I talk about are, just not just having the words, but making sure they're coming alive with some sort of graphical representation. And then they need to be encouraged that they're being used every day and every week. And you can do that formally in meetings. You also do it informally, where you have some kind of a a nomination process where anybody can nominate anybody for when they observe a value being represented. And people love this. So sometimes, it sort of says, isn't that a bit hokey or whatever? Well, no, it isn't. It's if you're doing this right, people absolutely love doing it, and they love being the recipient of that. So people are giving and receiving around your core values. And how great is that? And then at your weekly meeting or whenever it is you share these, it's so important to tell the story. Oh, so, Will saw Adam, doing something around teamwork, and what he actually did was this. And then if one of your values is teamwork, now you've told a story that reinforces that value. So everybody knows what it looks like, what good looks like. And so that's one way that you don't just have words on the wall, you're perpetuating those behaviors. And when I use the word behaviors, and I think you did as well in your question, Adam, it's really important that you don't just have a value, such as teamwork.
Right.
You need to have some descriptive behaviors that say, what do we mean at our company by teamwork? So a couple of bullets under there that just put a few more words on it, so powerful. And if you, in terms of helping you, get that right. Yeah.
That's great. So I guess if a company's going to go through a culture change, what's necessary? What are they going to have to be willing to give up or let go or rethink if they're going to go through this?
I love talking about this. So so first of all, of all the initiatives a company can undertake, culture is just so great because it's a relatively low investment, very high return, and it's fun. And I'm not sure you can always say that about, a marketing initiative or a new product development, or those tend to cost a lot more, are much riskier, have lower returns than if you invest in culture. So let's start with that. If you're considering your return on investment, hey, it's low cost, high return, and it's fun. They should be ready for that. And the next thing is finding, a couple of culture czars. Who are the folks that you would love to replicate, that you would love to clone, and get those working, with you on a small team. And those are what I call the culture czars. And then go through, doing the work. And I believe it can be done in about 90 days with one deed a week. And you will soon have, a great, well-defined culture with programs that are helping keep them alive and thriving so that they're really driving performance. And the one thing that I always encourage people to focus on is, culture is ultimately about the people. So you've got to have some way of rating or ranking your team. And if there's a couple of low scores on there, usually the biggest change you can have on culture is to unhire those low-scoring folks because they just do not fit your culture, and hiring a couple of great people that really do fit your culture. That's the fastest way to change culture, and the fastest way to have everyone going, hey, this feels good, So.
I'm curious about this. You talked about return, and I'm thinking about the cynical finance types, and you've been a CEO. Multiple times, you're CEO now, you're running this company, but you talk a lot about connecting the dots between culture and profitability. For the cynic out there, help them understand how that equation works.
You're just saying how the equation works for return on investment in culture?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, great. So some specifics that you can absolutely measure are, again, just keep, and I have a whole section in the book about this. There are several ways to measure, and I do encourage that it's measured. And you can use things like revenue and profit and more measurable things. Some of them are less tangible, but even the less tangible ones, like what I was talking about, where you can rank your people against your core values, simply, Bob, how does he rank for teamwork and for the 3 or 4 other values? Well, you can give a number out of that, out of 3, let's say, for that, and arrive at a number. And if you do that frequently, like every quarter, then that is ultimately you're getting the data you need to see how is that measure working. And even if you can't measure it, I think, again, all the CEOs that I've interviewed and worked with would definitely say, yes, investing in culture paid me back, hundredfold. So it's definitely one of those things that deserves to be prioritized in any business.
That's great. Last question, because I know we're up against deadlines here. When it comes to reworking values, when it comes to going through a culture change, what is it that groups, and you've worked with all sorts, religious organizations, nonprofits, corporations, what do they fear about this process that isn't as scary or as daunting as they might believe it is?
I think again, it's that question about, are you ready to talk about feelings, and are you ready to prioritize, what can be feel a little nebulous. I mean, some people are just they're comfortable talking about sales or pricing or where the next account's coming from and marketing campaigns, but when they have to sit back and maybe go somewhere off-site and do it in a different environment and talk about what values do we care about, what feelings do we care about, some people love it, but a lot of people, I would say not enough people love it, and some people are definitely afraid of that, especially leaders, because again, why? Because they're likely to go to a place of being vulnerable. But again, if you're working with people that you trust, then why not be vulnerable? And
right.
Whether I'm doing my EOS, whether I'm helping folks with their EOS traction day, or doing, hosting a retreat or helping a forum that's off-site, their favorite parts of the day are always when I set them up with some sort of exercise that has them learning about each other and talking about each other. And there can often be some tears,
Wow.
in the room. But people are feeling the most at that moment. And that's, I believe, why they love that part of the agenda and feel that was, the highlight of the day.
That's great. Well, Will, really appreciate having you on here. We encourage you to pick up the Culture Fix by Will Scott and check out culturezars.com. Will, thanks for being here today, and we hope to speak with you soon.
Thank you, Adam, and love the fact that you guys are interested in this stuff. And it was great meeting you at the Culture Summit and getting to talk about culture with all those other Culture Czars.
Absolutely. Thanks again. Have a great day.
Cheers. Bye.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to click subscribe, check us out on the web at culturezars.com, and we'll see you next time.